Hey, so I am here with Salman Ansari, and Salman is one of my Rite of Passage alumni. And I had been doing the North Star podcast for like 3 years, and that was really an interview podcast. And it became quite burdensome to do in that I insist on doing all of them live, and they're expensive to produce. They take a lot of time to edit. And I just wanted to, in addition, have something that was a little bit easier. I also don't like writing about writing nearly as much as I like talking about it. And when I get an idea, I wanted an avenue to just take that idea and boom, write a passage podcast, do something that was super easy. And I'd watch people like Naval Ravikant who had some nice short podcasts that were easy to share and even easier to consume. And actually, Salman, you don't know this, but I got some designs done last year for something called the David Perell podcast that was gonna be something like this, but I never quite followed through on
Interesting.
it. So you're a Rite of Passage ambassador. And when the time came, I said, Salman, you're a designer at a major tech company. I would love your help working on this. And so I reached out to you, and you got back to me in a week with an awesome design, but the first ones were super ugly. And so let's talk about how we went from the beginning to the end, how we used Eric Weinstein's portal as an inspiration, how we kind of copied it, and then we sort of morphed away from it into what we ended up with.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that makes me feel kind of happy is, so I'm actually, my background is engineering and I work on engineering all day. So I actually don't ever do design work, which made this kind of fun.
Mm.
Like, I think I've been getting into drawing and stuff, but one thing that was interesting about this is if you were to guess what tools I used for this, what would you guess? Just off the wall.
I mean, I guess I would say like Adobe Illustrator and
Yep.
Photoshop. That's what I
Yeah.
would say. What did you use?
So what's cool is I did the entire thing on my iPad with this Apple Pencil.
Wow.
So yeah, so I think that's one cool thing that's worth talking about a little bit is that I feel like the tools are changing and different people are approaching like design in different ways. So I kind of came at it with this approach of like, if I were to actually draw something from scratch, what would this be? And I had some ideas like, oh, David helps people get past like mountains. So we should have like a mountain. I'm going to draw one and stuff like that. But then it reminded, one thing I remembered was like the goal of the thing. You kind of always have this like ego that comes in when you start making creative work. Like, oh, I want to make this thing and it's going to look cool. And everyone's going to say that, oh, what a cool drawing.
Right.
But really the goal is like, people need to see it, see your face and recognize it. And they need to see the text and basically know what it is instantly. And then the second thing I realized was this is a podcast cover art. So it's very
Yep.
small. Like people only are going to see this in the
Mm-hmm.
phone. And so
That's a good point.
a lot of the like details and like those kinds of things actually look kind of bad in when compressed too much. So there were, so that was kind of an interesting thing. But yeah, I think when we started, the only thing I had, I wonder if I can share some of this. Hold on, let me just put up a screen here, and we can start looking at some of these hideous progress. So this was an attempt with color. Basically, like I was like, look, if it was in progress. I was just like, look, let me just send this. Actually, this was a really good thing to send because it's like you don't want to spend like a week like perfecting it, and then you get some feedback that's like, dude, this isn't even close to what I was thinking of. Like you even the name is wrong, whatever you might have done.
Well, it's funny.
So
This is very rite of passagey, right? Because like if you
yeah,
look at rite of passage, the whole idea is that writing is very expensive, so you want to push feedback up as far as possible.
right.
And we apply that to writing, but the same thing actually applies to design. This is what you're saying.
Yes.
You sent me the very first thing, and then we
Yeah.
could just diverge from here. And
Yep.
actually, it's so much easier to just start with something, even if it's
Yeah.
not great, than
Yeah.
to imagine if you had gone for another week here, then we wouldn't have been able to move through the cycles nearly as
No.
fast.
No, and I think that it's still always difficult even to send that first thing because I was gonna, still iterate on it, and then you're like, "Hey, how's it going?" I was like, "You know what? He's right. I'm just gonna send him something." So I'm glad we did that. There were a bunch of
Yeah.
things I learned from this one. One was like, a lot of times you want to put color to bring the character, like you kind of wanted it to be rite of passagey, right? So if we look at the rite of passage logo here, um, I wanted to bring this color in. But one thing I learned is like, it doesn't always scale to like the entire screen when it's normally a like tiny little thing here. So like colors don't always scale the same way when used in small parts versus larger parts. That's one thing. The other thing I remembered was I had this photo of myself that was taken like many years ago, and I thought it was a bad photo, but everyone tells me it's the best photo of me, and it's black and white. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, black and white photos of people just come across better, especially in designs and print and stuff like that. And that's where I think, I don't know if you sent this to me later, but we had this other inspiration for the podcast cover art, like the portal one. Here, let me pull that one up here. And you were telling me,
The
hold on, I
reason
think,
why I like this, the
yeah,
reason
go
why I
for it.
like this is that there's a couple things. The black and white thing that you're talking about is fairly interesting
Yeah,
in that that's something that I might have recognized implicitly that comes across here. I
yeah,
like that the portal sort of implies magic, and I like how the actual font here, the way it curls and flows,
yeah,
feels very magical.
yeah.
And it both has the symbolism with the the equations and the sine waves on the bottom left and the stars. It implies sort of progress, and actually if you listen to the portal, you see that the symbolism here isn't just by chance. Then it
Mm,
has the person, and you can look at this, it's very distinct. It isn't too overwhelming,
yeah.
and it also, as you see it more and more, it actually, it's like good music where you hear it for the first time, a song, and you're like, I like this song, and then you hear it a couple times and you might know the chorus and you might resonate with that,
Yeah,
and then once you get to know the song better and better, you actually see that there's layers of depth within the song. And as you build the relationship with music, that depth comes to life. That's what I wanted in a logo. So I sent you this both aesthetically, but also philosophically. I like the depth of this logo.
interesting. Yeah, I think that's it's good to hear. It's kind of cool to hear that now because like when you, especially in communication, when you receive it, like I am now making assumptions like what is it about this that he really likes? What are the things that I can take out from this? Like and that kind of led me to the second one, which was this sort of like layered approach, which I
Yeah,
liked a
show them
lot
side by
better.
side.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Some things that I liked about it were that it had this sort of layering. Like you notice even the way the text goes in front of the face, but some of the other stuff can go behind and so on. And so you get this like depth, and it sort of it comes back to life a little bit. The other thing I noticed, actually, you'll see this. I will share these little effects were my attempt of like, what if I made something like sort of like nebulous, like in space or something like that. And I found that when I did that, it looked kind of interesting up close, but when you made it really small, it kind of just looks like dirt. like like
Yeah.
it just I looked at it and I was like, that's super interesting. Like stuff that could look really cool, like in large, massive screens. Back to, when you're actually looking at it, I wasn't a huge fan of it, but I did like a few things. One, I liked sort of like this black theme where the black and white theme. I also found this effect with like
Yes.
these
With
little
the
lines.
letters.
Yeah. So I think that is one cool thing is like these little effects are literally done with my hand using a pencil, just waving across
Wow.
like that. And so when I was doing this, I realized I'm like, there's like probably a whole new sort of way that logos might be designed where like you can't really do this. Like you could do something similar to this, but it's definitely going to be more unique because you're actually drawing it by hand. Whereas when you're using like Photoshop and Illustrator and stuff, you're using the mouse cursor and you're creating geometric shapes and effects and things like that that are all sort of automated. Here you use, what's cool is you can get brushes. Basically, like instead of every brush stroke leaving like a pencil mark, it'll actually use a pattern. So you can have like a pattern of squares or like a pattern of lines, and then you can actually draw and do sort of weird, interesting things through that. So I really enjoyed that part of it. And let me show
Can
kind of where
you
we ended.
right here, I just show how the font changed. So if you
Yeah.
could show the rite of passage logo that you had before, then the original, And then this one, that was another thing. So we use a font called Titilium with rite of passage,
Yeah.
and we needed the logo to look the same in terms of the fonting. Yes, exactly. And so if you see the passage and the David Perell, they look very similar now, whereas
Yeah.
before they were fundamentally different. But
Yep.
then what the first logo had that this one didn't was the sense of color that
Yep.
felt very rite of passagey. So that's where I
Yeah.
came back to you. I think I said, this looks too much like the portal. It's a good place to start. I really liked how the line divided this between the name of the podcast, my name, and sort of my
Yep.
photo. But then I wanted to get back to a place where it felt like it
Yeah.
was rite of passagey. And remember, we thought about adding the rite of passage logo and the words, but then
Yep.
we decided at the end not to.
Yeah, because I put the logo on there, and I'm like, when you have a logo that has the type in it, it's kind of just redundant to write it
Right.
again next to it. Like people don't need to see that. But I do, yeah, it was kind of interesting. It's like this sort of like springy calibration where it's like this is way too like purple and like there's too much color going on here, and then it's like okay, it looks cool, but like where it's lost a little bit of color
Right.
and character really, and so this last sort of iteration I think is a cool one to kind of check out as like a sense of like somewhere in the middle. Um, and I was pretty happy. I was glad you were happy with how it turned out. But some of the things that I found interesting about this was like, if you have a color that you want to get across, it doesn't have to be the main color. It can be kind of, that's where the
Hmm.
strip idea kind of came in, where like it gives you this sense, even like mentally for me, this was like, okay, you have David who has many things that he's bringing to the table from from around space, and but this particular thing is branded like almost like a sticker. This is the rite of passage piece that you're offering here, and that's when people start to recognize that. The other thing I thought was kind of random. These lines are again just sort of pencil lines, just sort of randomly connecting ideas.
Right. Kind of
Meant
apply the network of the internet too.
the
That's
network
how
of
I
the
see
internet.
that.
Yeah, and yeah, you run into more interesting design constraints. Like if when I first put this logo on purple, it looks bad because it's just purple on purple and it starts to fade away. So you actually need
Hmm.
a way to make it pop. So I don't know if you noticed here, but there's like lighting
Yes,
applied
I
like
absolutely
all,
noticed that.
yeah. And so what that, it makes it kind of seem like it's floating out and gives it a little bit more resonance and presence.
Glow.
Yeah. And the same thing that you described earlier, it's worth actually looking at that. The other, oh, wait, I lost it, but yeah, actually, I'll put it up here. So in this, when you're talking about the text effect here, to this like gradual change from dark to light.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's important to look at, it's not random. There's a very intentional way that it's transitioning. And that's because if you notice the lighting of his face, the light direction is coming from the right here. And so the text actually portrays that accurately. And so you believe it more. It's kind of like a subtle thing, but hold on. If I pull this back, you'll see here with even with this David Perell here, I don't know if you noticed this, but
Yeah.
this piece here is actually solid white. Um,
Right.
and so the lighting is a little stronger here. And so, I mean, these are little things, obviously, like most people are going to be looking at it like, like this, and they probably may or may not notice. But one thing I learned a lot through animation and playing around with that is that the lighting basically is everything. It's just like everything around the color, around the contrast, around like the design, it always comes to light. So like here, you've got light source coming from this right side here, and it like illuminates your name and stuff like that. So that was kind of fun to see. I think it kind of connected together well and turned out well. And yeah, I'm glad the color is really nice. So it's good to use it, but not overwhelm. That was my main worry, was like, it's just going to be too much and there's too many things. So I think, yeah, I definitely prefer like just show them what they need to see and not much else. But yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. So you want to show the 4 side by side? Let's
Yeah,
see.
let's do
We'll
that.
have the first one, how it went to Eric Weinstein, then our copy of Eric Weinstein, and then what we ended up with. We did all this in about a week. I think we
Yeah.
only spoke once on the phone for about
Yep.
15 minutes.
Yep.
I said to you right at the very beginning, you're the creative director here. I'm going to give you full autonomy with the first one. And then I kind of went back and I said, well, I think that it could look a little bit more like what Eric is doing. And
Yeah.
then you brought that back. And then this felt too much like
Yeah.
the copy. So then
Yeah.
we brought it up. And it's funny how the first one actually shares some similarities with the last one. They
Yeah.
do kind of come together
Yeah.
in terms of the way that it's colored, but we needed to go through a kind of even a hero's journey of finding Eric, coming back, and then ending up with this, which
Yeah.
I think is really good.
Yeah, I think it was also interesting. Like I was thinking about like we all kind of have to recognize like what is it we're trying to get across and what are we trying to overcome? Because you were mentioning like, I think it just needs to have my face in it. I think it just needs to. And I was like, you're
I
right.
didn't want to.
You didn't
I
want
really
to,
didn't
right?
want that. Yeah.
Yeah, because you were like, I don't know. I mean, you can talk about what your thoughts were on it, but it's like at the end of the day, the goal of it is for people to know what it is quickly and like what are the most effective ways to achieve that. And these are the tools that you have.